Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Time to Change Wales's 2021 Stigma Symposium. We're delighted today to be joined by so many people, and it's heartening to know that our work continues to connect with such a wide audience as we strive towards making a positive impact in reducing mental health-related stigma in Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. We're particularly grateful today to be joined by the Deputy Minister for Mental Health and Wellbeing, Lynn Needle. Lynn has always been a great supporter of the mental health cause, and her work focused on the mental health and well-being of children and young people is well known to most of us. It was great recently to catch up with Lynn in one of the first sort of face-to-face meetings we've been able to have in Swansea, and I look forward to hearing her speak today, and look forward to catching up hopefully on more face-to-face meetings as restrictions lift. I'd like to begin today by providing a trigger warning that some of the content that is going to be shared today may include material that might be upsetting or triggering to some of you. Please be reassured that it's perfectly okay to leave, take a moment if it becomes necessary, and to rejoin at your own convenience. So we're here today to discuss Time to Change Wales's work. But what exactly is Time to Change Wales? Stigma and discrimination in mental health is a global issue. The work of Time to Change Wales is our contribution to that issue for the people of Wales. Many of the initiatives that exist across the world are those that organisations have shared, borrowed, modified. The stigma community across Wales, across the world rather, is great at sharing the work that people have done, and we're proud to be a part of that. So Time to Change Wales is a national campaign with the clear goal of ending stigma and discrimination experienced by people living with mental health conditions. Since its inception in 2012, Time to Change Wales has been supported in this campaign by the Welsh Government. We've also been fortunate to receive support for specific parts of the campaign from the National Lottery and Comic Relief. And with the support of these organisations, Time to Change Wales has achieved a great deal. We're the only anti-stigma campaign in Wales delivering at a national scale, and we hold an impressive track record of delivering evidence-led and insight-driven campaigns. Between 2012 and 2016, we enabled a 5% increase in positive attitudes. So that represents roughly 120,000 individuals in Wales whose attitude towards mental health improved during that time. And our credibility and profile amongst employers has resulted in nearly 200 employers signing up to tackle stigma. So that accounts for over 300,000 employees in Wales, nearly 1 in 4 of the Welsh workforce. But we all know our work here is not yet done. Over the sort of past 9 months, we've been dedicating much of our focus to working with valued partners such as Ethnic Youth Support Team and performing substantial scoping research for one very important reason. More must be done to address the stigma that continues to be increasingly experienced by those from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in Wales. Our determination to tackle this issue is shared by Welsh Government, who in its programme for government for 2021 to 2026 has made a commitment to tackle stigma and to promote a no wrong door approach to mental health support. We share that ambition, and we share Welsh Government's aspiration to make positive change. And I'm sure Lynn will discuss this in greater detail in her opening remarks. We have a packed agenda for today's symposium, and I'm really looking forward to what we've had in store today. As I just mentioned, I'll shortly be handing over to Lynn for her opening remarks. Following this, we'll be highlighting the perspectives of those who've lived with and have personal experience of stigma. We're delighted to be hearing from one of our proud champions, Brian Fakir, who has shared his story as a lead contributor to the recent Talking is a Lifeline campaign. Following this, our programme manager, Ben Jeffries, will be speaking to Dragons rugby player Ashton Hewitt to discuss his experiences of racism and mental health related stigma. We're very grateful for Ashton giving up his valuable time to be with us today. We'll have a short comfort break then, and following that comfort break, our partner Ethnic Youth Support Team will be hosting a panel discussion led by their Chief Executive, Rossio Sofentes. Taking part in the panel today are Suzanne Duvall of Diverse Cymru, Alfredo Ikoya, Director of the BAME Mental Health Support, and Jessie Jones, Project Manager and Counsellor for African Community Centre. We then look forward to our campaign and strategy lead, June Jones, sharing with you the key findings from the scoping research commissioned by Time to Change Wales earlier this year. The research offers some excellent insight into the opportunities that exist for Time to Change Wales and other like-minded organisations to make a big difference to the lives of so many in the months and years ahead. Following June's presentation, Sue O'Leary, Director of Mind Cymru, will map out how Time to Change Wales' future priorities are seen and how the campaign plans to tackle the ever-growing issue of stigma experienced and felt by Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in Wales. The past 18 months has presented many challenges, but we are very encouraged by how Time to Change Wales has demonstrated its agility to continue its positive and incredibly important work through a global pandemic. We look forward to sharing what we've learned with you today, together with a vision for our future. It now gives me great pleasure to welcome the Deputy Minister for Mental Health and Wellbeing, Lynn Neagle, to offer her opening remarks. Over to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Alan, and good afternoon, everyone. Can I just start by saying thank you so much for inviting me to open today's event. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about the important work of Time to Change Wales and also the Ethnic Minorities and Youth Support Team. The last 18 months has been an incredibly difficult time for all of us. The isolation and worry of a global pandemic has taken an inevitable toll on all our well-being and our mental health. Many of us who are already struggling to cope have found it harder to manage, and perhaps some of us will have been conscious of the impact on our mental health for the first time. For me and for the Welsh Government, supporting the mental health of people in Wales is of the highest priority. That's why I was so delighted to accept the First Minister's invitation to join the Government as the Deputy Minister for Mental Health and Wellbeing. It's also why I'm proud that our ambitious programme for government puts mental health front and centre of our work to support recovery from the pandemic and beyond. Our commitments to prioritise investment in mental health, to redesign services to support prevention, to tackle stigma and to promote a no wrong door approach will give us the tools we need to offer people the support they need when they need it. But in order to be able to offer that support, it's crucial we understand the barriers people face in accessing help with their mental health. And as we all know, one of those barriers is stigma. It was very good to read the results of Time to Change Wales' recent mental illness attitude survey, and I was really pleased to see an increase in understanding and tolerance towards mental illness amongst the Welsh public. However, the same survey showed a significant decline in the number of people who felt comfortable talking about their own mental health. This is a very concerning trend, especially at a time when we know more of us will be struggling and in need of help. We know different communities talk about mental health in different ways, and we want to ensure that everyone can get the help they need. To do this, we need to understand the barriers that people face with different lived experiences and different backgrounds. That is why the research carried out and being discussed today is so vital. A one-size-fits-all approach does not and will not work in improving mental health and tackling the stigma that prevents a person from seeking support. Time to Change Wales were kind enough to share some of their headline findings with me before today, and what is clear is that mental health stigma for people from ethnic minority communities is a broad and diverse issue. The findings lay bare the complex and interdependent levels of stigma faced by different communities across Wales. Stigma can be attached to a community from outside, from within a community or culture, and from the individual themselves. A really important point from the research is what works for one community doesn't necessarily work for another. The way that mental health is seen varies by age, gender, and communities. That means we must think differently about how we offer access and support to the different communities that make up our nation, and we need to design services to take that diversity into account. We need to treat everyone as an individual and take the time to understand diverse cultures and communities. Tackling stigma and discrimination is a key priority in the current Welsh Government Together for Mental Health delivery plan. This also has key actions to support professionals and services to deliver more appropriate care and support through adoption of the Diverse Cymru Mental Health Workplace Good Practice Certification Scheme and Cultural Competency Toolkit. Welsh Government officials are working closely with the Wales Alliance for Mental Health through a specific task and finish group to consider what tangible actions can be taken to improve access to mental health services amongst Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in Wales. We will also be working with the Wales Strategic Migration Partnership and Traumatic Stress Wales to look at the unmet mental health needs of asylum seekers, refugees and migrants. We will ensure that this work is captured in the work supporting the new Race Equality Action Plan. We're very privileged today to be able to hear firsthand from people with lived experience of stigma. I know it takes huge courage to be able to tell people your own lived experience. It is your powerful and personal accounts that bring this work to life, tells the story behind the research, and is the reminder to all of us why this is so important. It helps us plan services around the individual and understand the diverse challenges and stigma faced by people of all different characteristics and communities here in Wales to make it a better place for all. For that, I thank you for sharing your personal experiences. The work Time to Change Wales are doing with the Ethnic Minorities and Youth Supports team provides us with a better understanding of the needs of the diverse communities living here in Wales. To develop this understanding further, we need to prioritise building trust and relationships with grassroots organisations in Wales who have the depth of credibility and knowledge of their communities and their needs. Being able to speak in a way that works for you, being able to find the outlet or support that will empower our mental health without fear of being judged, whether at home or work, is more important than ever. And I'm really grateful to all of you here today for the part you play in enabling this to happen. The point of today, though, for me, for Welsh Government and for decision makers, is to listen. A Greek philosopher once said that we were given one mouth and two ears so that we should listen twice as much as we should speak. It's very sound advice, but one that's not always followed by every politician I know. But I intend to take that on board today and listen and learn this afternoon and wish everybody a very successful event. Thank you again for inviting me. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, for that clear and ongoing commitment to challenging stigma in mental health and stigma in mental health for those from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in Wales. Great that you also reminded us that the Welsh Government remains resolute in improving the mental health of Welsh citizens, particularly post-COVID. As you very rightly noted, barriers to accessing services are real, and it's so pleasing to hear your awareness and understanding of that. So thank you. I'd like now to introduce what I believe is a key factor in the success of Time to Change Wales, the sharing of the personal experiences of people who've experienced stigma and discrimination and how it's impacted on them and their families, how they've worked to address this themselves and how the journey continues. I know that the work of Time to Change champions is far more than the structured talks and events that they attend, as the work they do within their own broader communities continues to deliver this important message. I know too that mental health services are far from where they should be on the issue of stigma and discrimination, and that does include us in some of those services in the third sector. Lynn noted that there's often a fear of being judged and the impact of that on people accessing services or continuing with services. When a few years ago at the Time to Change event, I talked about my own mental health difficulties and that I'd accessed psychotherapy, a senior colleague from another mental health organisation remarked they were surprised that I'd shared such information. We all need to be better at this. And for me, the best way forward is to listen and learn from champions and from the people who are really working at the very difficult areas of this. So we're moving now into a section where we'll have a short video to share with you with some extracts from our research. That will be followed again by Brian Fakir, a Time to Change Wales champion, who's going to talk a little bit about his involvement. And then we'll conclude this section with an interview with Ben Jeffries and Ashton Hewitt, as we mentioned earlier on. So I'd like to hand over now into a short video section.
People's perception of Black women, that they are incapable of being upset or functioning, don't understand the role black women play in their family. This creates an issue. I have to work hard when I see the doctor to be taken seriously. They don't match my criteria because they don't have my experience. This is a stigma from health professionals. I have to prove I'm suffering. The process of getting help when you need help is so inaccessible.
Nobody wants to go to the health system for their mental health because they think if they've been signed to a mental problem, they're going to have social service on their bag. They're gonna have all these people coming. Like if you're a mother, you think if you are labeled as not stable as a mother, if you have depression, anxiety, things like that, they feel like their children is going to be taken away.
I'm at an extreme risk of getting picked up by the police.
I remember one of my nephews was experiencing mental health issues and he actually booked himself into a hospital because he couldn't cope, yeah? But the rest of the family were afraid. Like, they did not want him to do that because there was someone else who had had a previous mental health issue and they felt like it wasn't dealt with properly. So there was that issue and then they just tried to get him out of there as quickly as possible.
The challenges I faced was meeting the expectation of those around you, family dynamic, and the community dynamics of what people perceive you to be.
You feel everything is harder than usual as you carry all that pressure on you, as the men are supposed to be the go-getter, boss, you know?
I struggled with mainstream support systems and have gone my own way. A couple of years ago, I did go to the doctor and I didn't want to.
Speaking about my experience with the counselor, I feel that I wasted that time, my time and public resources funding. I won't be going up to those sessions. It's a waste of money. I wasted the taxpayers' money because I didn't gain anything. Neither did they. They didn't achieve anything. It comes back down to the individual, you know, and obviously depends on the culture and faith they come from, and then willing to have those options available for them.
Often, the GP, there's a power balance. If clients have had a bad experience with GPs, or even maybe the receptionist in the GP, they're very likely not to go back.
Therapy is not for me. Because whoever I'm going to speak with doesn't know my needs perfectly, especially as someone who is an immigrant coming to the country. I have first to explain to the therapist my culture and the nuances of my culture before I start speaking about what bothers me about it.
Sometimes you may not want external people outside your culture to be aware of your mental health. When you're talking to colleagues or friends outside of the culture, it's difficult to get them to understand where you're coming from.
The conversation around mental health is so white, like whitewashed, you know what I mean? Even if it's not, then the message is not for an ethnic person. It's just like, oh, we're going to use the same messaging, but instead of putting a white person, we're going to want a person of color in those ads.
See it a different way to Western culture. We see it as a disgrace, a taboo. No one wants to go close to a person who has mental health issue. The stigma is too much.
Created by the white men. If it does exist, it means there's something spiritually wrong with you.
So I just felt like before everybody spoke, I just thought I was the only one who was going to mention that I was growing up in a culture where mental health didn't exist.
You're crazy or demonic. My mom used to say, I am the devil. You're dancing to the devil's tune, or something like that. That's what she would say.
I know what they say. Always pray to God. God is always the answer. Well, I did that, but I felt like I still needed to talk to someone. But I could not because there was nobody to talk to, not even a counsellor to talk to you. Even when I go to school, there's no one that will advise you on depression or anything.
You're perceived as being lazy if you describe yourself as depressed.
You try and seek help because there isn't someone who looks like you, who understands your culture, who understands where you are coming from. It ultimately stops you from actually engaging with the services.
I found that community groups as a campaign run for a community by a community, that would be the best way to talk about myself.
My parents don't understand my mental health or emotional well-being. So it's hard to talk about my feeling to them. If I do openly discuss, they think I'm going mental, as there is no such place for depression in our culture.
BAME young people normally struggle to disclose mental health problems they have to family members and hide when accessing counseling sessions. These young people also often say service providers do not have cultural competency to deal with their needs.
Mental health problems come in different ways and with different drawbacks within asylum seekers and refugees living in Wales. My experience supporting these communities and my own community, and myself being an asylum seeker and now a refugee, is there are many losses, there are many changes, there are many challenges we face in this transition period when you claim asylum and when you finally get granted refugee status. If you add on top suffering from anxiety, depression, sadness, isolation, loneliness, you could understand how hard for many people
I'm sure you found that incredibly powerful, as I have. Those messages are, I'm sure, things that we will take with us from today and hopefully put into our work. Moving on to the next short video, we have Brian Fakir, who is a Time to Change Wales champion. The Time to Change Wales champions are people who've given up a huge amount of their time, who have been prepared to put themselves forward. They're supported by the Time to Change Wales team, who obviously do their very best to provide training, support and guidance. But it is the individuals themselves who are prepared to stand up in front of people from their communities and tell them what it means to have a mental health problem, tell them what it feels to have to, make those first steps into the world of mental health. So I'd like you now to listen to Brian.
As a child, I'd faced down the stigma of racism. Decided that if I couldn't beat them with my fists, I'd beat them with my mind. So I studied hard and learned to show a brave face to the world. A court case 5 years ago challenged all that. I got a 2-year suspended sentence. The fight just left me. A few months later, a friend died by suicide. His final letter described a dark place. I realized that I'd come to know that dark place all too well. I felt as if I was standing at a cliff edge. Eventually, I began to speak about my feelings. It was a lifeline. I learned mindfulness practices that have really helped, alongside better self-care. It's meant letting go of the brave face and learning to say no. Today, I realized that it was from that dark place that I began to find the light once more, and that the view from a cliff edge can be utterly life-affirming. It's time we talked about men's mental health. It's time to change Wales.
A great video, and Brian again giving his time for that is very much appreciated. So a big thank you to Brian. Like us now to go into the next session, which is Ben Jeffries, the Time to Change Wales Programme Manager, who is speaking with Ashton Hewitt, Welsh Rugby Union player, about his personal experience of racism and mental health stigma.
Hello everybody, my name is Ben Jeffries and I'm the Programme Manager for Time to Change Wales. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dragons rugby player Ashton Hewitt, and we're really grateful for Ashton giving up his time to talk with us about a very important subject today. Now, Ashton, you are widely known as a rugby player for the Dragons, but you're equally known for speaking out about your experiences of racism. Can you just start by telling us what impact these experiences have had on your mental health, please?
I think they've had a pretty big impact, to be honest. I've never been one to think of myself as struggling with my mental health. But with lockdown, and I received a lot of racial abuse online, on Twitter, on different social media platforms, regarding the things that I'd say about racism and my experiences. And it was very hard to take. It was in the media, in the news. There were headlines about things that were tweeted at me, things that I would say. And my phone was just constantly going and going and going. And I wasn't somebody who would always be on my phone like that. I wasn't too active on social media. So it was really my first experience of being as involved on the platform as I was. And I just felt like it was just eating up my time. I couldn't not look, because it was things that were being said about me and to me. And I was always looking, and it just got me really down. The things that were being said, my mum and my sister could see. So I was seeing them get down because of the way that I'd been treated. And it was just really hard. It was really hard to put up with what I was putting up with, but it was also quite strenuous on my mental health, because every time that I've spoken online about my experiences and the racism that I've received throughout my life, it's me reflecting on my entire life and some of the pain and upset that I've been through and my family's been through. I just got extremely down, to be honest. That's the best way I could put it. I wasn't really motivated to do much. I was trying to finish my dissertation for my master's at the time, and I was going through a stage where I just couldn't really bother to do anything. I was just upset a lot, and it was quite difficult to deal with.
Now, I understand this is one of the first times you've spoken openly about your challenges with your mental health. I mean, looking back, what was your biggest concern about speaking out generally about racism, and how did others around you react? Was there a lot of concern for you, or a lot of encouragement? Just talk us through that process of what you went through.
I didn't want to. I never sort of self-diagnosed myself with anything, and I'm not sure if. Basically, the way I felt was that I'd be a little bit. I don't even know the right words to say, to be honest. I didn't really feel if it was justified for me to talk about my mental health, and that I might have been struggling with anything. I think my mum and people around me could see how down I was. They got quite worried. I was injured through a lot of it as well, so there were things just adding up. And I think the biggest concern was that I still wanted to carry on with what I was doing and having the conversations that I was having, but it took me a while to sort of learn how to manage myself, if that makes sense. And I think maybe the concern was that I wouldn't be able to do what I felt needed to be done, and have these conversations that are educating people and so on and so forth, whilst being able to protect my mental health and take that downtime and sort of really understand myself in that aspect. And like I said, it wasn't affecting just me, it was affecting the people around me and their concern and worry about me, because my mum said that she'd never seen me as down as I had been at those times, especially when I'd injured my knee as well. So it was all a bit concerning, really. It wasn't a nice place to be in.
And with the experiences you've had, I mean, it's incredible, really, what you've described, what you've been through. But you've continued to persist in speaking out about inequalities and racism. I mean, why do you think speaking out is so important?
Because it raises awareness, because everybody has their own set of experiences, or know somebody who've had a different set of experiences, and they understand any any one situation, if that makes sense. And if nobody is being exposed to somebody else's challenges or experiences, then they're going to be none the wiser to it. So for me, it's so important because not everybody experiences or has witnessed racism and how damaging it can be and the extent to which racism can go. So somebody needs to tell them, you know, they need to be made to understand, you know, how damaging racism is. And that goes the same for any form of, you know, social injustice or anybody's experience or hardship that they go through that other people may not have been exposed to and need it explaining to them. So it's so important that one, you speak out about it to educate other people and make other people care and understand, because at the end of the day, there's people out there going through things, you know, and it's only going to get worse if they're suffering on their own. So that's the main reason for me why it's so important, is just to make sure that everybody's aware that this is how certain people are feeling, this is what certain people have got to deal with, and people need all the help they can get, really.
Yeah, and I think we've learned a lot about this in recent months through the research we've performed, and we now know really that stigma surrounding mental health can be a massive barrier to people speaking out. I mean, what do you think can be done to tackle stigma amongst Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities?
I've had to think about this, and I think it's the same. I think it's the same things that need to be done to tackle stigma in general, to be honest with you, in terms of normalizing conversations, you know, making people feel comfortable, stop all the negative connotations surrounding mental health and those sorts of things. Obviously the research says what it says, but from my experience, I think it's going to be many of the same issues that that the whole of society faces in terms of confronting mental health and the conversations around it. So the biggest one for me would be education, normalizing, signposting, and those sorts of things, really.
And just lastly, you know, having been through what you have been through over the last 18 months or so, what advice would you give to someone who has experienced mental health stigma and discrimination, and someone who may be struggling with their mental health at the moment?
To anyone struggling with their mental health, is speak to someone. And I think you educate yourself on it as well, because a lot of the time, well, going from personal experience, you know, you feel down, but do you know if this is something, or you always wonder whether you feel like you should say something about it? Do you feel bad enough to say something about it? So I think it's just going to find the right people to speak to, whether it be a mate, a family member. You know, the conversation luckily is becoming more normalized. People do understand mental health a lot better these days, and there are many conversations going on about it, and there's guaranteed to be somebody that you know who's probably feeling the same way, or a similar way to the way you felt. So don't be scared to speak to someone, because you know you're only doing yourself harm at the end of the day, and there's always going to be people around you that are happy to listen to you. So that's my biggest word of advice, really, would be to not hold everything in, and make sure you go and speak to somebody about it, because not everyone feels amazing.
Well, Ashton, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you for your time today. I think your insights have been incredibly powerful, and the work you've done over the last 18 months in particular has been absolutely incredible. And we can clearly see you have made a big impact. So thank you very much for your time, and we wish you all the very best in the future.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Yes, a big thank you to all our contributors in that section. And Ashton, one of the comments you just made there now about speaking to a mate or a family member, we really need to be remembering that, I think, as we go through the day. How do we enable people to feel confident to have those conversations? So we're now going to be taking a comfort break. we're a little ahead of schedule, which is great because it does mean that if the debates get into some really good ground, we can have a bit more time on that. So if we could all come back here, please, for 1:20, and the panel discussion then on stigma in communities will take place from there. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that short comfort break and the earlier proceedings. My name is Rocio Cifuentes. I'm Chief Exec of Ethnic Minorities and Youth Support Team. We're delighted to be working in partnership with Time to Change Wales on this very important topic of mental health and stigma. And we're really delighted I'm delighted to be chairing this panel with three such distinguished guests who I'll be introducing very shortly. And just to say a little bit more about the aim of this session, which will last about 45 minutes, we're really hoping to hear and understand from the panelists and from discussion afterwards what mental health stigma really is within the diverse ethnic minority communities of Wales, what is already being done to tackle mental health stigma by different organisations and community groups operating across Wales, and thirdly, what still needs to be done, what more can we do as third sector organisations, but also perhaps what would we like Welsh Government to do or other organisations in this space. So we really invite you to share your views and give your ideas after the panelists have spoken. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce the panelists who are real experts within their communities and delivering mental health services. So I'm firstly going to introduce Suzanne Duvall, who is mental health and dementia manager within Diverse Cymru. Welcome, Suzanne. And I'm also going to introduce Alfred Oyekoya, who's director of BAME Mental Health Support Service based in Swansea. Welcome, Alfred. And then the third panelist is Jessie Jones, who is project manager and counsellor within the African Community Centre. So welcome to all three of you. We really look forward to hearing from you all. And then the third panelist is Jessie Jones, who is, I can hear myself repeated, but and yes, each panelist will speak for about 5 to 7 minutes. I will be stopping you each after 7 minutes. I apologize in advance. And telling us all about what you do. And following those three presentations, we will be inviting questions from the audience. 7 minutes. So, audience, I was in the participants platform earlier. I could see many really distinguished and experienced people there who I'm sure will have a lot to contribute. So please do, I do encourage you to share your questions, and we'll do our best to get through as many of them as possible. So I think that we are the first speaker that we will be hearing from is Jessie. Is that correct? Yes. So Jessie, who's from the African Community Centre. Over to you, please. So welcome, Jessie.
Hi everyone, I'm Jessie. I run a counselling and play therapy project within the African Community Centre for asylum-seeking, refugee and BAME children and young people aged between 3 to 18. I'm also a counsellor on my project as well, and we also have an adults counselling project too, which I'm a counsellor in. Today I wanted to briefly talk about how the stigmas in which we're talking about creates barriers to therapy, especially with our clients who may experience racial inequality and discrimination, which as we know, can also become a barrier to access and support alongside stigmas that are attached to mental health. They have a huge impact on clients, which can lead to them trying to avoid public stigma by dropping out of therapy completely or not even seeking support because it's associated with negative stereotyping. So this shows that these stigmas create a major barrier between a person needing mental health support and them accessing therapy. So stigma can also cause people to feel ashamed, so they hide their symptoms and do not seek treatment until the issue becomes really extreme. So I thought it would be great to ask a few of our clients what their fears and thoughts were before coming to therapy, to find out firsthand the stigmas our clients deal with. So here's just a few. So one is, I already feel people treat me differently because of my background. I don't want to feel isolated even more. I was afraid of negative judgment I may have from my family and friends. I already feel out of place and I just want to fit in. I was worried if I spoke about how I felt or how I was struggling, I would get picked on or bullied. I was worried about bringing shame to my family's name. Having mental health problems means I'm evil. I want my mum to think I'm strong, not weak. I thought people would think I was crazy. What if everyone thinks I'm dangerous? And the last one was, my mum believes my alcohol dependency is a spiritual weakness and only needs prayer to overcome it. So then I asked my clients how they overcame these, what helped them to reach out and get support. So some mentioned that people talking to them about their own mental health problems and experiences when receiving therapy helped. Another mentioned hearing other people's life stories and how certain past events affect them mentally, which was then relatable for our clients. So this comment comes from a client who comes to our weekly Zoom journey talks, where people talk about their background, their stories, and how support helped them. So you don't have to actually talk, you can just listen, which is great. Others mentioned that they educate themselves online privately. Some joined groups where they talked about emotional health, which then led them to joining support groups talking about their own emotional health. Sadly, one mentioned after nearly taking their own life that they had to talk to professionals about what happened and got offered support. So I also asked the same clients what their views on mental health were now after therapy. Some said mental health is just like physical health. Everybody has it and it's not something I should ever have felt ashamed of. Another is, if people judge me on my mental health problems, that's a reflection on them and not myself. From what I've previously gone through, it is normal to carry such trauma and reach out for support to overcome it. Another said, I didn't realise that mental health problems affect so many and how normal it is. It doesn't mean I'm crazy. And from one of the young children said, talking about what's hitting me inside is brave and it's not a weakness, it's a strength. This shows that we need to educate and talk more about mental health to be able to normalise it, so these awkward conversations aren't awkward. I'd like to quickly mention a case study of mine. So a concerned mum got in contact with African Community Centre, worried about her 10-year-old son who didn't want to go to school and was isolating himself from everyone around him. Things he once enjoyed, he no longer cared about, and his eating, sleeping and overall health was declining. They recently came here from Albania and had been living in Swansea for 2 years. She mentioned that the school had given her my details for my project to gain support for his son, as he was missing a lot of school. But mum did not want to engage in therapy or talk for him to talk to anyone. She just wanted advice on how she could get him to school. So I told mum that it would be more beneficial if he came to therapy to talk about what he's experiencing, as we need to fully understand what's going on for him. And without doing so, I was unsure if I'd be able to fully support him, but I could always advise. Mum was persistent about him not coming to therapy. So I started asking mum about her views on mental health and her experiences of it. At first, she was resistant to talk about it, but then admitted she did not believe in mental health, and his stigma around mental health was that it stems from evil. So she did not believe that what his son was going through was anything to do with mental health, as she didn't want his son to be associated with being evil. This is where I decided to talk to mum about his stigmas around mental health, cultural stigma, and also case studies similar to what his son was going through, which helped to normalise this. Through doing so, mum was able to relate her own mental health struggles, where I explained further that if your son sees you mask your own struggles and not talk to anyone about them or reach out for support, he could be doing the same. I then went on to talk about how it would be helpful for her to have similar conversations with his son so he could understand more, and it will help normalise going to therapy. Within 2 weeks of mum having conversations with his son about her own mental health and stigmas around mental health, and educating him many others who struggle and seek support, he had a session with myself and he was engaging well. The reason why he didn't come to therapy to begin with was because he was already struggling with these feelings of belonging, didn't feel he was fitting in with school, and past events that he'd experienced kept coming back in the form of flashbacks. He was also worried about mum's views on it, that she would think he was weak. So instead of getting support, he suppressed his emotions and kept what he was going through to himself, which manifested in anxiety, flashbacks causing panic attacks, and low mood. So he started to isolate himself from everyone, trying to hide what he was going through because he was so ashamed. So by educating mum and talking with mum about mental health, it helped her to have these conversations with his son, which broke down the stigmas in which his son was associated with mental health. But not every story ends like this. Previously, I spoke about a young man who tried to take his own life rather than coming to therapy or reaching out for support. Sometimes these stigmas can cause suicide, and that's how serious it is. Some people not only deal with these stigmas, but also experience cultural stigma, racial inequality, discrimination, power balance with GP surgeries, language barriers, lack of knowledge of surgeries, stereotyping, and that's just to name a few. And this is on top of dealing with anxiety, depression, or any other mental health conditions. I believe we need to educate more than ever, not only on just mental health, but stigmas around it, so we can break these stigmas down. So then more people can become aware of what they are going through, so we can then normalize it, so they feel more confident and comfortable to reach out for support, where we then can help them overcome what they are going through. I think someone mentioned earlier that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, and I couldn't agree more. We need to use compassion and empathy to understand everyone as an individual and what they are personally going through to help overcome these barriers of stigma to therapy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessie, and bang on time. Thank you so much. Lots and lots of food for thought there. So please get your questions coming in the audience, please. So the next speaker will be Alfred Oyekoya, who's the Director of BAME Mental Health Support. So over to you, Alfred.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank everyone for joining this afternoon as well. Today, I just want to speak briefly on a topic that is important about what we can do differently to ensure that mental health care is culturally competent and appropriate to ethnic minorities' needs in Wales. I think this is important because over the month, I think we've gotten to a level where almost everyone in Wales have an academic appreciation of the importance of mental health and in the reality of the fact that a lot needs to be done when it comes to the needs of ethnic minorities as they assess the mental health intervention and support in NHS Wales. I think this is important because of one thing. And that's why if you ask me, for example, what is the most important date when it comes to mental health this year, I will say to you, it's not actually October 10, which is the Mental Health Day, or the week that we refer to as the Mental Health Awareness Week, but it's actually April 21st, because that day was the day that the Mental Health Act of 1983 was being asked for consultation so that it could be reformed and ensure that the Act is a reflection of the multicultural diversity that we have in the UK at the moment. Before I go into the specific of what needs to be done differently, I just want to quickly acknowledge what has been done over the month, particularly from NHS Wales and Public Health Wales, because I must confess that the pandemic has revealed a lot of strength in Public Health Wales and NHS Wales in terms of what we do differently compared to what used to be done before the pandemic. When it comes to data gathering, data processing, data communication, there has been significant improvement. However, Wales is the birthplace of the best NHS service in the world, and it's just so important that because health is devolved to Wales, devolution at the root of it is eventually politics, because service users do not understand how they should experience a different level of excellence when it comes to mental health services in England, and then when they come to Wales, the services that they experience or they receive as some areas of improvement. And I think what we can do differently to ensure that ethnic minorities in Wales receive, optimum services, so to speak, when it comes to mental health, are three major areas. I think the first one has to do with the removing barriers that has to do with mental health service recruitment in NHS Wales, because Wales is a country of diverse and inspiring communities. And I really believe that we need to make the most of the opportunities that the diverse nature of Wales has given to us to ensure that we can get more, competent and qualified ethnic minorities into mental health services in Wales, because that will make massive difference in the experiences of, those that need that support. And then also, secondly, I think we also need to engage on a more holistic basis, which is continuous and integrated. We need to get to a level where we build on mutual understanding, not just with organizations that provide mental health support specifically for ethnic minority, like Diverse Cymru and BMHS. We need to ensure that we have, wider audience. And I think we are doing that in the right direction. Like today's event alone is a proof of that. We just need to build on that to ensure that we are getting all these insights from, organizations that work directly with ethnic minorities to get insights on what can be done, to make things even much more better. And then lastly, as part of the recommendation that I think we can do better to ensure specialist mental health care is culturally competent and appropriate for ethnic minority needs in Wales, I think we also need to implement, the outcomes of the consultation of the Mental Health Act reforms, and I'll just give some example of those, recommendations that can be implemented and that will make massive difference almost immediately. And I'll also make sure that this is in writing to the CEO of EYST so that it can be forwarded to, the right authorities. I think first thing first is about decisions about medication, should wherever possible be in line with the patient choices. However, we know that sometimes it might not be that straightforward, but one thing is important is that we need to make sure that when it comes to detention and retention and all that, the decisions about medication should wherever possible should be in line with the patient choices. And we are hoping that the government will amend Part 4 of the Act to create a new framework for consent and refusal of medical treatment, because these are some of the feedback that we have received from some of the service users that we provide service for. And also, we are also advocating that the government should implement the recommendation for patients to be able to choose a nominated person, and that should replace the current nearest relative provisions. Some of the thoughts I'm saying might be a bit technical, but these are part of the core changes that will make massive difference to the experiences of the people that we provide services for. And also, patients should be able to identify their nearest person in advance in their advanced choice, document or at the point of detention. This is also important to make sure that they have that ability to make that recommendation themselves. And then, lastly, on Mental Health Act reform, the care and treatment plan should literally be made a mandatory requirement at the point of detention. There should be clear, care and treatment plan as at the point of detention for ethnic minorities as well. The plan should, however, be subject to internal scrutiny and approval, but it should be clear, that care and treatment plans should be a core, part of the clarity that needs to be in place before, detention takes place. I know this is not a challenge which the Welsh government or NHS Wales or local government can meet on its own. We will need a broader and deeper partnerships, new skills, new ways of working. We will need to take more responsibility for our own health and well-being. And I know we will need a much more seamless whole system approach that will be equitable. But I do believe that if we work together to look at all these recommendations together and ensure that, we have a system that is equitable for all, we will be making massive difference. And I say this again, like I mentioned earlier, devolution at its core is mere politics to service users. And that's why it's just so important that we ensure that we take on board, this feedback that have been given to us by the service users that we provide service for. Thank you, Rocio. That's my contribution today. And I will be happy to take questions on that.
Thank you so much, Alfred. That's fantastic. You touched on so many really core areas, including legislation, policy, workforce, detention. I think that's an amazingly broad presentation there. Thank you so much. I'm sure that's generated a lot of questions. And so our third speaker is Suzanne Duvall, who's the Mental Health and Dementia Manager for Diverse Cymru, with so much vast experience specifically in mental health for diverse communities. And Suzanne has very ambitiously prepared some slides for this as well. So good luck with that, Suzanne. Welcome.
Thank you. And before I start, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me. This is an excellent platform to speak about mental health, about the stigma, and the Lived Experience podcast, the stories from Ashton and Brian. They were so powerful. So thank you so much. I feel privileged to be part of today. I do have a presentation. I don't know, is that going up? Okay, and as you can see, today's my presentation is going to talk about stigma, but in a different way, to do with faith, culture, spirituality, and spirit possession. So why is mental health stigma a serious issue? A stigma can cause delays or even dismissals of people suffering from these illnesses from attending therapy. And in communities where mental health is not taken seriously or even seen negatively, those suffering from it will not take up professional help. Therefore, they can end up spiraling down both emotionally and physically, which can further affect financial positions through a lack of optimal working, among other things. And though it's important to note first that although this is specified at BAME, we must remember that this is wider than just African and Caribbean and Asian people. We're talking about Roma, Irish, Traveller, Gypsy and Eastern European communities as well. So with regard to the term stigma, I'd like to speak briefly to you about it in relation to faith, culture, spirituality and spirit possession and its impact on mental health and psychosocial disability, and as a disability associated with mental illness. I'm sure that many of you will be aware of what stigma means, but just a reminder of the negative connotations related to the term stigma. Looking at dictionary definitions, stigma is identified as a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person, with association to negative words such as shame, disgrace, dishonour, a stain, a taint, a blot on one's character, a blemish, brand, mark, slur, and a smirch. In mental health and psychosocial disability, the words commonly associated are a negative mark, stain, or a blemish. So how does this negatively impact on faith, culture, spirituality, and spirit possession? The next slide, please. Myths, misunderstanding, ignorance, negative attitudes can all result in stigma for people living with mental health conditions who may be treated as dangerous, different, or as if they are somehow less than other people. In service take-up and service delivery, I would suggest that it has a massive impact, as this negativity can impact on decision-making and service take-up and service delivery. For those in the community, these supernatural beliefs, perceptions may help to explain away mental illness and how it is perceived and how it may be cured. But going to faith healers or exorcists as a first port of call may exacerbate their conditions and lead to further complications down the line. But many communities would prefer to explain mental health as spirit possession than admit to a mental health condition. This is also part of the stigma or shame on them, their families and communities. For those providing services, these same negative views, fueled by a lack of understanding and cultural sensitivity, may lead to appropriate services not being provided. The next slide, please. So how can they explain this away? How can they be excused for being ill, for not being themselves, or for acting different? Words for evil spirits, jinn, jadoo, black magic, possession, words for evil spirits, some familiar and some not so, but all concepts that medical staff, psychiatrists and the criminal justice system are having to countenance. As an example, and just as an example, I will speak of some British Asians who are Muslim, although this belief is around in the Muslim tradition. Blaming the supernatural for mental health problems, why exorcists are teaching serious illness and murder is explained away by blaming evil spirits. I do want to say, though, that demons, evil spirits, the concepts of devils, heaven and hell, demons and evil spirits, etc., are believed by Christians, and that and this is in the New Testament, and it mentions demons over 100 times. Yet little notice or attention is given to this fact, causing disparity, particularly with services provided. Next slide, please. Just some further bits of factual information for you to reflect on what I want to look specifically at jinn in relation to spirit possession and mental illness. Among British Asians in Great Britain, the belief in evil spirits is widespread and can be concepts of black magic, and at its more extreme is believed the body can be possessed by evil spirits, and the concept of the jinn is in the Quran. What the jinn are not is not universally agreed upon. The concept of jinn, as I say, is in the Quran, and so for British Muslims in particular, there's a theological grounding for their belief serving these concepts. There are over hundreds of spiritual healers across the UK, some charging thousands of pounds. Evil spirits and jinns are explained for the cause of epilepsy, bipolar disorder, criminal activity, and sometimes not even getting a job. So-called healers can be harmless and can be a great source of help for some people, but the concerns are when they replace medical care for serious problems. Next slide, please. As you can see on screen, I have some quotes from an exorcist and from some patients. There was a case where a young man became ill. The family thought he was possessed by a jinn. Exorcists were called in and treated him over time, but he did not recover and was taken to hospital, where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had become ill at the age of 18 and was not taken to services until he was 31. That's 13 years later, and in all that time, a lot of damage had been done. This is not necessarily a problem with social class or education. For groups of clinicians working in inner city areas, they might hear this. A lot of the times it can become a common issue. And it's key that the patients admit to their religious ceremonies and healing, because it can be helpful as long as it is not an alternative for medical care. For some cultures, it is more acceptable to be possessed than mentally ill. It is a combination of how cultures make sense of people and how stigma just prevents them from recognizing what it really is. Quite often, people see abnormal behavior as somehow being caused by some bad influence rather than a sign of mental illness, and that badness becomes an external malevolence or black magic by someone, a shadow, a jinn. That kind of thinking means now courts are also having to grapple with the concept of spirit possession. Next slide, please. So there's lots more I could say, but as a summary, I will leave you with these thoughts. The negative connotations related to this term stigma. The myths, misunderstanding, ignorance, negative attitudes can all result in stigma for people living with mental health conditions. Impacts on service take-up and service delivery. For those in the community, it may help to explain away mental illness and how it is perceived and how they may cure it. For those providing services, these same negative views, fueled by lack of understanding and cultural sensitivity, may lead to appropriate services not being provided. Spirit possession and mental illness seem to go hand in hand, but some positive action to help improve understanding is a leaflet by the Royal College of Psychiatrists called Feeling Stress. If I can have the last slide, please. And this leaflet, like as I say, is produced by the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and you can get it on their website, and I can also send you them electronically if you like. But I believe it's an excellent source of information and support. Some headings in the leaflet which may help to answer some of the issues that come up from people going through the illness, or for service users and also for practitioners. And as you can see, some of the headings that is on there. For example, what if my problem is caused by jinn possession or an evil eye? There's also, isn't prayer enough to cure this illness? So there are a lot of questions, and all the answers, a lot of the answers are in this leaflet as well. And can I just say thank you?
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you to all of the presenters, panelists. The main thing that I've taken from those three presentations is just how diverse the communities are in Wales, and also how diverse the issues that need to be considered related to stigma. So it's such a wide-ranging issue that has impact across so many areas of a person's life, and also across so many different policy areas. So I've just been really, I've learned a lot just in the last half an hour. So thank you to the three of you. We have about 20 minutes, and I've seen a few questions have started to come in. So there's a set of questions which really all relate to workforce, to the mental health workforce, I guess. So I'll try and summarize the three questions, and then maybe you could each give a response. So the broad question is, what role does a diverse workforce have in terms of achieving cultural competency and tackling stigma in mental health? And then there are two related questions, which one was around to what extent do you believe that one of the key sources of stigma is actually service providers, in terms of people possibly be feeling afraid of being judged by service providers, and that itself being a barrier to access and support. And then a related question, also in terms of service providers and workforce, is so the question was framed around the concept of autonomy and cultural understanding, and how can service providers and the workforce be supported so that they don't automatically judge behavior which they are not familiar with culturally, so they don't judge that behavior as in inverted commas mad or unsettling. So that's the first set of questions, really. I'll pause there for you to just think about them, and if anybody wants to put their hand up and say they want to reply first while the others think. So yeah, service providers, what can we, what is their role, and particularly in terms of their diversity and their ability to respond to diverse communities? Suzanne.
Okay, well, a lot of questions, and it's all jumbled a bit in my head, so I'll be answering, and I might be answering some of it and not all of it, but you can always prompt me anyway. But first of all, I think organisations, and I've seen it in the chat as well, which is true, organisations need to be representatives of the communities that they serve in order to serve those communities, because I think we all would feel more confident to see people who look like ourselves going into a service. But it also comes down to part of whether it's mental health nurses training or doctors training, because it doesn't matter what colour we are or what culture we're from. If we're having the Western culture of training, then those issues that I talked about, maybe the supernatural or understanding other people's thoughts, because people who come from other countries, they don't have our understanding or our knowledge of those illnesses. It might be a different one. So really, it comes down to the training of medical staff to be culturally competent and have, as you know, Diverse Cymru has a cultural competence certification scheme, which is the only one of its kind in Great Britain, as I understand, and is a certification scheme. And we do deliver training to not just medical staff and practitioners, but the voluntary sector as well. And it's around things like culture. It's around unconscious bias that we all have. But it's what are we practicing? What are we taking forward? So I do really believe that education is huge, and it's not about just a white medical model, but it is culturally appropriate to other areas, other cultures, other people, because we all need that. And while we've been delivering this training, and if you won't know this, but every health board in Wales has signed up to this, and we're just taking areas of work, so small areas of work, voluntary sector organisations. We're working with the mental health reform in Ireland. We've worked with the University of Kent. So we are imparting this knowledge that they have to think wider, and soon we're going to be going into universities as part of the social care training for those services, to open their minds wider, to understand other cultures and what is happening around other cultures, and by their own unconscious bias. So it's unlocking that as well.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, definitely. And just somebody did ask the question, which is, how relevant is this discussion to their pilot project training health and social care professionals? So to answer that question, I think highly relevant, and I would definitely endorse the training from Diverse Cymru that you mentioned, and also for people who aren't familiar with the other organisations represented here, please do look them up, because they all are definitely part of the solution. So thank you. Alfred or Jessie, would you like to respond to the first set of questions?
Yeah, it's okay if I jump in before you. Sorry, Alfred. Yeah, there was, same as Suzanne, there was loads of questions, so I'm not sure if I'm going to answer a few, etc. But Suzanne did mention cultural competence, which is so important, especially in my work as a counsellor, especially working with asylum seekers, refugees and BAME community. And with us, it's important to have a different, diverse range of counsellors as well, and on our referrals, offering what counsellor they would like to understand the clients and what they need. You also mentioned understanding certain things that people might think are strange and are weird. I know from one of our counsellors that they had a client before who couldn't give him eye contact, and they already knew that from their culture and background, it's
respect.
So yes, sign of respect, exactly. So knowing that then and not thinking it's strange or weird, so showing that understanding, it's so important that we make our clients feel comfortable. And with great experiences with mental health, mental health support, they will then talk about that, and we can break those stigmas and also perceptions of coming to counselling, hopefully. So yeah, sorry, I talked really fast.
No, that's great. Thank you, Jessie. And Alfred.
Hi, Lucio. I just want to compliment what Susan and Jessie have said in terms of education, so important, so vital. But one other area I think is so important, as BMHS, we like to advocate for, is the role the government can play in making massive changes. And that has to do with the framework itself, the legislation, because these are the vital, bedrock that fits into every other form of, either apathy or discrimination and all that. And when I say structural discrimination, these are policies and practices within all institutions that are intended to be neutral, but they just result into adverse, outcomes for particular groups. And that is where the government comes in, and that's where the role of the act comes in, the code of practice. And I say this, there's a paradox at the moment in the act itself, in the laws, and I'll give an example to explain the paradox. At the moment, when someone from ethnic minorities do not show aggression, the key word is do not show aggression, and they speak about their mental health, there is an unconscious bias for them not to be believed. And then on the flip side, when they do show aggression, and then there is that tendency for them to be sectioned immediately. And all this feeds from what I refer to as this structural discrimination that is inherent in our legislation. Don't forget that most of the legislation that we have at the moment, as at the point of conception, they are not a reflection of what the diversity that we have at the moment is. And that's why the government has a role to play, not just in form of education, but also in looking at the policies, looking at the laws, looking at the framework that regulates how we serve. Because at the end of the day, most staff in hospitals or in offices, they are acting in accordance with a rule book. And sometimes there is less room for judgment when it comes to mental health. You have to play by the book, so to speak. And so if the book itself is not structured or worded in a way that all these exceptional cases are taken into consideration, we will keep having all these adverse outcomes. And that's why we strongly hope that the recommendations that we have put forward, which I've also sent to yourself, Rocio, in an email, can be escalated to the right authorities to ensure that they are implemented, because that will stop organizations like BMHS, Cymru, ACC, and EYST to not be firefighters solving the same problems on a year-on basis, but we can actually solve this problem at source and then look up, of course, to greater things that we can do together for the betterment of the community. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you, Alfred. It's I really echo what you said about, we between us, many of us have proposed solutions and made recommendations, and I will definitely share what you have sent me with Time to Change Wales. I'm sure that Lynn Neagle will be given a copy of today's events, either the recording or a report, and she will be looking upon it with great interest. And yes, I think together we can be stronger if we speak collaboratively. So definitely endorse everything you said. Thank you, all of you, for those responses. And obviously we can't answer everything in detail, but I think that was really, really, really useful, and hopefully did answer some of the questions. So we just have time for one more set of questions. We have had, so I'm going to try and summarize. There's 3 or 4 questions, but they basically all relate to how to make mental health services more accessible to the diverse communities that live in Wales. So that's the broad question. There was a specific question that came in, which is, how exactly can organizations, mental health organizations, be encouraged to go out to the community to raise awareness rather than waiting for people to walk through their door? That's one question. And another question, which was about what specific things can be done to better reach minority ethnic communities in terms of suicide prevention specifically, and what are the main barriers there? And thirdly, there was a third question, which is just how can people with different abilities, e.g., disabilities including sight loss and alongside mental health issues, how can those specific groups be supported to access services? So I apologize, there's a lot in there. That's the main thing. Accessibility is the main thing. What specific things can organizations and mental health services do to make sure that they can really effectively reach people from diverse communities who need the support?
Well, one of the things that we do as part of our cultural competency training is to encourage the people that we're delivering to find out, or we can send them the names of different groups, organisations that's in their area, and we encourage them to go out and speak to them, find out if they got a newsletter, write something in their newsletter, encourage people to come in and see around. We're always encouraging people to do that. Also, there's the term mental health, because the actual term mental health is a Western term, and not everyone understands that. And when I was working with AWETU, which is Black Mental Health Group, some years ago, I was the manager there. We carried out some research to find out from different Black communities what terms they understand. And feeling low, low mood, and depression were terms that they use, not the term mental health, because that's not understood and it could mean anything. And that's, I think, the stigma was with that term as well. So using people's terms as well, so they understand where you're coming from. Also to understand that to have a low mood or depression is a mental illness, but it's part of your body. Our head and our body are attached. So if our head is not well, our body might not feel well. And understand that it's a whole body thing. So if you went to a hospital or a doctor's with a broken leg, broken arm, the same thing, you can go to the doctor's if your head doesn't feel right, if you're feeling low. So those things that we're encouraging both sides to understand and to take up and to listen to, really. And again, talking to people. And that's just services as well. So services need to not be so, I don't know, what you call it, like, I don't know, I can't remember the term, but be so far away and look like people think they can't approach them. So for services to be more open and approach the groups. So we do that, and we do let them know the names of the groups. And I know on EYST you've got an excellent map with the BME communities in Wales, and I've sent that map out to I don't know how many people, so they can see groups in their area, and also some of the, like, Swansea Council Voluntary Services, C3SC, find out the groups from there, and I send them out to people as well. So I don't even know if I've answered the question partly, fully, wholly. Well,
I think definitely the point about the importance of language and the importance of services making sure that their demeanour is as accessible as possible.
An ivory tower, that's what I was going to say. They're not ivory towers, they're not up there. They have to show they're opening the doors and they're coming out to everyone as well.
Yes, and thank you for the plug of our online map, which is just about
excellent.
The point is just that there's so many organisations out there who mental health services could link to work together. Yes, thanks, Suzanne.
It's well used.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Alfred or Jessie?
Can I go next? Okay. Fab, thanks, Alfred. Yeah, when I first started my project with the ACC, which was about two years ago, I wanted everybody to know about it, I wanted the clients to know about it. So I got into schools to talk about skills, to meet others. I would talk to organisations. So getting that conversation started so people know that that support is there. Also with some of the groups that the ACC do, it was talking to some mums as well to show them the playrooms that we have, what we do. So they had an understanding of it. So I think it's important to talk and to let people know what they have accessible to them, and to get out into the community where they will be. And also you mentioned, I think, about was it about them understanding suicide? Was that?
Yeah, I think how can suicide prevention information and messages be more effectively communicated to reach ethnic minorities?
I think, again, it's educating as well, and offering that education on suicide and suicide prevention, and also putting things more online so it's more accessible, so it's not time sort of slotted. But I think educating is the way forward, and having those awkward conversations, because not a lot of people like to talk about suicide. It's, again, if we talk about taboo, it's a taboo subject. So having those brave conversations and talking about them.
Thank you, Jessie. And yes, I appreciate they're not easy questions to answer in a very short time, and there's a lot more talking that needs to happen, but this is just the beginning of a longer conversation, so thank you. And Alfred, I hope you've had time to gather some thoughts.
Yes, I did, and I do have 2 thoughts to share, and then 1 answer for each question. And then the first one has to do with how do we engage more of ethnic minorities. And I'm sure we all know for now, most mental health services and interventions tend to follow a one-size-fits-all model, which we all know that is not working and we want to improve on. And I just want to use this opportunity to highlight some major triggers of mental health stresses for a lot of ethnic minorities, which sometimes tend to be swept under the carpet because they are clearly not factors that drive, stresses for other ethnic communities. Such as immigration issues is a big deal. These are key major drivers for a lot of, mental health stress for a lot of people. And I highlighted that to say that one of the easiest way to engage with ethnic minorities when it comes to mental health is to try to identify the key drivers of these stresses. Because frankly, what stresses a lot of ethnic minorities have been seen statistically to be far different sometimes, for other community members. And that's why it's so important to do everything to try to meet them at the point of their needs, on issues that are of so importance to them. I mentioned immigration because I know that, a lot of asylum seekers and refugees, these are big deals for them. The waiting times alone, this is something that can put people in a big, mental health stress when it is not properly communicated from home office and all that. But that's just an example. I'm sure there are so many more. And then the second question that has to do with statistics. I think what can be done differently in terms of suicide, again, the ball is now back in the court of the government again. This has to do with the way statistics reporting is being done at the moment. At the moment, BMHS is lobbying ONS to try to ensure that, suicide rates and all that is also broken down according to ethnicity, because at the moment it is not. Remember I said at the beginning of my presentation what Public Health Wales and National Health Wales have done differently throughout this pandemic and deserve a lot of commendation for is the fact that there has been a lot of improvement in reliance on our own data compared to before, when we have to be reliant on statistics from England. But what we can do differently, particularly in Wales being a nation of sanctuary, we do know that Wales is a pull factor for a lot of undocumented migrants, asylum seekers and refugees and all that. But at the moment, the statistics do not really show clearly, 0 as a matter of fact, in terms of the breakdown of suicide rates and all this as per ethnicity. And these are the kind of conversation we're having with ONS at the moment, that can make a massive difference, because it can help not just in educating, but also in influencing policies that will be shaped and targeted to the people that we provide service for. And I'm hoping that is something that the government can take forward, and we're working hard, because recently the recent statistics was released last month by ONS, or early this month, about the statistics on suicide. And we are hoping that the next one will be broken down into these details so that we can use that as a basis to educate and inform the communities that we serve on the importance of seeking for help and not suffer in silence. Thank you, Rocio.
Thank you, Alfred. Such important points you're making. incredibly useful, the detail of your recommendations. And I'm also aware of the importance of recording ethnicity properly in, I think there's still a lot to be improved in terms of ethnicity recording within health and even death certificates and so on. So there's a long way to go, because as we all know, the policy and the commissioning of services is dependent on the evidence and the data. So there's a direct link there. But huge thank you to all of you for all those answers. Really useful and clear. So we just have a final few minutes, and I just wondered if I could put you all on the spot, and just ask you, what would your maybe one key ask, or maybe one or two, but maximum two key asks you would really like to make to Welsh Government, and if they're going to be serious about tackling stigma within mental health stigma within ethnic minority communities, what would you be asking them for?
But one of the things that we did ask for, I belong to WAM, Wales Alliance for Mental Health, who has the ear of ministers, and we're working at that high level. And one of the things that we did ask for was for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic task and finish group, looking specifically at the issues around Black people, and say Black people, I'm on about Black, Asian, minority, ethnic people, and looking specifically at the issues and what can be done, how they can practically do something and not just rhetoric, because we've had enough of the rhetoric. And since the murder of George Floyd, the COVID, the Black Lives Matter movement, I think we really do have such a stronger voice now. And so we're in touch with Welsh Government, and then Welsh Government, we got the cross-party group, as you know, we got the task and finish group, there's a race equality action plan that have come out, and that we don't just want good words. Action has to be associated with everything. So whatever comes out, the race equality action plan, UK, that, and of course we've got the Race Alliance Wales, which you're heading up, Rocio. So it's action. So whatever comes out, we want the actions to go with it. We don't just want another book with nice words in it that looks like it's going to do something, but nothing happens, because we can't keep repeating ourselves. We're not projects. You can't just give us 3 months and then we're on to something else. We're real people with real lives, with real sufferings as well. So action, that's what I want to ask Welsh Government to do something about it.
Thank you, Suzanne. They can't say that we haven't been clear.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sure the message will be received and hopefully acted upon.
Already is.
Yeah. So, Alfred or Jesse?
Alfred, Jesse, do you want me to go? Okay, I think in terms of simplicity, summary, I think what I would like to see as part of the legacy the Deputy Minister for Mental Health will do or should do is to reform the code of practice for Wales when it comes to mental health. I think it's due for a reformation. It's due to be looked at, and it's so simple to comprehend. If you look at the Mental Health Act, of 1983 being reformed by the UK government, Department of Health and Social Science, and you could see the outcomes and the feedback. I look at the code of practice for Wales on a weekly basis, and I could see a lot of room for improvement. And I think it is high time we build on this kind of collaboration that we're having to then look into the code of practice for Wales, because at the end of the day, this is what guides how our staffs, in Wales, practice or implement the act of when it comes to mental health act. And we know clearly that there are areas of improvement. And I think the time to act on that is now. And I'm hoping that the Deputy Minister for Mental Health will use this opportunity to make it a legacy, during our time in service, to then look into that code of practice and reform it accordingly.
Thank you, Alfred. That's a really strong and practical recommendation. So yeah, hugely appreciated. And noted. Thank you. And last but not least, Jesse.
Thank you. I can only go off what my clients and service users have come back and said, but I think making sure some healthcare services or other services are culturally competent and supporting them with that. And I think also making I think I think making more things. Oh God, I'm getting mucked up now. Sorry, and educating more on stigmas and breaking down the stigmas. But I think definitely with some services, making sure they're culturally competent, because that's what some clients stops some clients from coming to therapy, unfortunately. So yeah.
Thank you, Jessie. Absolutely. Cultural competency is the name of the game, definitely. So a huge thank you to all of you. That's been so informative, powerful, and heartfelt. And thank you also to everyone who shared questions. They were really, really insightful and pertinent too. So it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure, and I hopefully we'll all be carrying on these conversations very soon. Thank you very much to Time to Change Wales for the invitation and the opportunity to chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rossio. That was very well coordinated, and a big thank you to the panel. The passion, the knowledge, the sort of practical guidance you provided there. I've got to be honest, I could have carried on listening to that for hours. And I know I will be in contact with the organisations that have been there myself for our organisation going forward. The next session, I'd like to hand over to June Jones, the Campaign and Strategy Lead for Time to Change Wales, who's going to give us some of the key findings from the scoping research that was commissioned earlier this year. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Prynhawn Da. So as Alan just explained, I'm going to take you through the findings of the research. A key priority for Time to Change Wales this year was to commission research into the experiences and needs of people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities across Wales in relation to mental health stigma. So this presentation will share the findings of the research that we commissioned earlier this year. Next slide, please. So the research objectives that were set, well, firstly, to find out whether mental health stigmas are an issue within ethnic minority communities, what forms of stigmas are experienced and how they manifest, what can Time to Change Wales do to address the issues and how best to reach different communities, what activities should be prioritised and how it should be delivered. Next slide, please. So the research methodology and the sampling. The research comprised two different types of research. First of all, a literature review that captured research already published around mental health stigma within different ethnic minority communities. And then there was a phase of detailed qualitative research. So the qualitative research covered six focus groups, the respondents were recruited from the following demographics: Black women, particularly women aged 16 to 25, young men aged 16 to 25, particularly from Black communities, people from South Asian communities, particularly Bangladeshi and Pakistani, East and Southeast Asian communities, vulnerable migrants, and traveller communities and white minorities. So in addition to those six focus groups, there were also depth interviews and roundtable discussions held with strategic and grassroots diversity organisations across Wales, and they were EYST, Diverse Cymru, Race Equality First, Chinese in Wales, Glitter Cymru, the African Centre, and India and the India Centre. Next slide. So the literature reviews, and do you remember this is based on research that was already published before we then moved on and commissioned the qualitative research. So within the literature review, there were six themes identified. First of all, the concept of mental health is less accepted within different minority ethnic communities and less often talked about. So that contributes as a barrier to seeking help. The fear of judgment from others within their own ethnic and or cultural community. Again, that's another reason why some people might avoid seeking help or reluctant to disclose a problem with their mental health. Mistrust of healthcare professionals and services, And this is in relation to concerns around confidentiality, as well as hearing upsetting stories of how some people have been treated within the system. The impact of personal experience of mental health problems on the wider family unit. And that's the sense of collective stigma that can affect a family's standing within their community, or the fear of being ostracized from their own community. Mental health problems within ethnic minority communities can sometimes be heavily stigmatized, and people with mental health problems given stigmatizing labels, and that negative label stops people from seeking help. And then the influence of culture on coping with mental health problems. For some, the pressure to be seen to be strong, and intersectional issues such as for men not allowed to show their emotions. The next slide, please. So moving on now to the qualitative research, which covered the focus groups, the depth interviews and roundtable discussions. These are the key themes to emerge from the qualitative research: cultural awareness, layers of stigma, mistrust in the mental health system, Time to Change Wales campaign approach, and opportunities for the future. So the next few slides will cover each of those particular themes in more detail. The next slide, please. Cultural awareness. In this particular section, again, this is coming from what respondents told us in the focus groups and the depth interviews and the discussions. So what we were hearing from respondents is a desire for higher levels of cultural competence in mental health to better understand specific experiences at both an individual and intersectional level. There was a feeling amongst some respondents that sometimes ethnic minorities are grouped together and objectified in relation to mental health rather than being treated as individuals. Mental health services are often delivered from a white and middle class lens, that's then adapted at a tokenistic level in which others ethnic minority communities. And people from ethnic minority backgrounds are sometimes or often stereotyped as being tough and reluctant to ask for help. The next slide, please. So what we uncovered in the qualitative research were layers of stigma that contribute to a fear of opening up about mental health problems. So there can be stigma from outside the community, often linked to structural racism, so perhaps negative perceptions, stereotypes about how a particular community is perceived. And then that intersects with stigma within the communities themselves, and in turn that can lead to internalized self-stigma. So the three types of stigma attached to a community or culture from the outside, and then stigma within a culture, within a community or culture, which then brings on shame, and then the stigma that comes from the person inside in terms of creating self-stigma. We found as well that trust, privacy and confidentiality are paramount precursors to feeling comfortable opening up about mental health issues, and also a generational divide between parents and their children. The next slide, please. Mistrust in the mental health system. Well, our respondents told us about a fear and mistrust of the establishment of mental health services themselves, which can be based on either negative, direct or indirect experiences that they've heard from friends and family. So this mistrust can prevent ethnic minority communities from seeking mainstream mental health support out of that fear of the long-term consequences for themselves, their family, and their community as a whole. And the next slide. So just based on the findings, what this means for the Time to Change Wales campaign approach, from the respondents themselves and interpreting the findings. Firstly, developing the campaign through that intersectional lens, rather than grouping and simplifying the experience of ethnic minority communities. The importance of building trust and relationships with grassroots organisations in Wales. And the Time to Change Wales campaign materials. improving language, tone and relatability, developing nuanced and culturally relevant materials, and building those Marcoms channels to gain inroads into those different communities. We found as well, talking is a key aspect of Time to Change Wales, but talking doesn't work for everyone. It's not always the most helpful path. So what are the alternative forms of calls to action that can be offered? In terms of the campaign approach, showing how we're co-producing with behind-the-scenes campaign development. We found as well that the personal stories section on our website was very positively received, so how we can make even more of that. And also the importance of more equitable relationships with communities having greater ownership and control. And on to the final slide now. So what opportunities are there going forward into the future? Well, firstly, signposting to community-led organisations with expertise, signpost to mental health, grassroots services, promote better pathways between community and mental health organisations, and lastly, to champion cultural understanding of mental health across Wales. Thank you. I think I'm handing over to Sue now.
Okay, thank you, June, for that. And I think it's quite significant that a lot of the research is absolutely on the same message that our speakers have been all day. The next speaker is Sue O'Leary, Director of Mind Cymru, who's going to talk us through Time to Change Wales's future priorities and ambitions.
Fernanda, good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to hear from everybody today, to hear from the Deputy Minister, from champions, people who are sharing their lived experience, our partners, and I think such a stimulating panel discussion with Rossio, Suzanne, Jessie and Alfred. So it's a difficult act to follow, but my job today really is to follow on from June's sharing of the scoping research and everybody's experiences they've shared to talk about our future ambitions for the campaign, and I'll take you through a couple of slides now to outline our thinking. Thank you. So as you can see, and as has been mentioned throughout the day, Time to Change was established in 2012, and during that time we've been successful in bringing about measurable change in public attitudes in Wales, which we're very proud of. So I suppose just to kind of draw out some of the headlines, our work with employers has been seeking to create more open and more positive working environments so that the culture and people's experiences enable them to speak more openly about their mental health and to tackle and challenge stigma in the workplace. And we've also, over the course of the campaign, we've developed a lot of practical resources, toolkits and kind of key principles that we've shared with numerous employers across Wales to enable them to embed and sustain long-lasting change within their organisations. And I know it's been mentioned by Alan previously, but I'll mention it again. We've got nearly 200 employers now signed up to the pledge to help us to tackle stigma across Wales. And this accounts for over 300,000 employees in Wales, which, as has been mentioned, is nearly a quarter of the Welsh workforce. And that does cut across public sector, private sector, small and medium-sized organisations, and it's really representative of the people we're trying to reach and serve. You've also heard today, and you've seen today, just how much our campaign is underpinned by a diverse pool of community champions who all willingly share their experience to encourage and support others to talk openly about their mental health. So I think that's been a cornerstone of our campaign from its inception. We've run targeted communication and social media campaigns, as you've heard about, and these include the award-winning men's mental health campaign, Talking is a Lifeline, and there was a clip from that campaign earlier in the session. And we've also been a key partner in Time to Talk Day, which is a UK-wide campaign where we work with partners across England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland to get everybody in the four nations talking about mental health. And as you'll see also, we're really, really proud that, the public attitude survey is telling us that we're seeing a 5% shift in more positive attitudes towards mental health through this work. So moving on to the next slide, please. Thank you. What we've also found over the first 3 phases of the campaign is that Time to Change Wales is now a trusted voice on stigma, and we're very proud of the part that we play as a key delivery agent within the government's Together for Mental Health delivery plan, specifically regarding those priorities on tackling stigma and discrimination. And it's a real privilege to have had the Deputy Minister, Lynn Neagle, join us today and speak so supportively about our work. I've mentioned about the work with employers. This is a cornerstone of the campaign, and it aligns very closely to the policy drivers of the economic strategy for Wales, specifically in relation to growing the economy, keeping people in work, maintaining their mental health, but importantly, reducing inequality. And the next phase of our campaign, which I'll mention and go into more detail on shortly, will engage more directly and in a more systemic way with professionals within health and social care, which very much aligns to the Building a Healthier Wales prevention agenda. So we are confident that going forward, our ongoing work in tackling stigma with people living in poverty and people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and also through our work with health boards, will contribute towards more effective, high quality and sustainable healthcare, which is where we feel we can play our part to contribute to Welsh Government's recently published programme for government. So moving on to the next slide, please. So I wanted to just touch briefly on the importance that we, as kind of organisations, both Adveriad and Mind, as partners in this campaign, place upon the intersectionality between race, poverty, in our wider organisational strategies. So I think what we recognise is that intersectionality is between race and poverty is really significant in terms of some of the more negative experiences that people are experiencing in accessing and gaining the support they need with their mental health. And I think from what we've heard today, the research insights that June just shared with us, but importantly, the messages coming through from the panel discussion and also from people's experiences, it's really important that we have a strategic focus on these priorities. And as it mentions on the slide, Mind's newly published strategy is about supporting people who are disproportionately affected by mental health issues. Similarly, Adveriad is focusing on supporting and reaching the most vulnerable people in our communities, which includes the same groups. And what we know is that young people, people living in poverty, and people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities have the highest mental health needs, but are experiencing some of the worst experiences of accessing support. So we're delighted today that we have had the opportunity to share the findings, which June went through on the scoping research with you, to better understand how mental health does impact different Black, Asian and ethnic minority communities in Wales, and also hearing from people on their personal experiences. So moving on to the next slide, I'll talk us through some of the ambitions that we're hoping to achieve in the next phase of the campaign. So we've had continued support since 2012 from government to run this campaign, and also, as Alan mentioned, from other funders. So subject to continued support and investment, we have some really clear ambitions around how we can scale and develop our work with the 2 key audiences that have been mentioned a lot today, which is people living in poverty and people from diverse communities, diverse ethnic communities. And the reason for that is that, everything from the insights and people's experiences are telling us that stigma, discrimination are absolutely real within those communities, and it's an area where we need to do more. So whilst we've achieved a lot since 2012, it is really important, firstly, that we do continue with our campaigning work pan-Wales to maintain that 5% attitude and behaviour change. So it's really important that everybody will feel the benefit of our anti-stigma work, but we will, as I've mentioned, be targeting and reaching out to communities where stigma is a real barrier to accessing support. So some of the new initiatives that we wish to include as part of our future ambitions are, firstly, we want to work in partnership with grassroots organisations across Wales. And so following on from the scoping work, our plans are to co-produce, to deliver in-community interventions which are aimed to address stigma at society level, but also self-stigma, working with organisations who are embedded in communities. And it really is important to do this in partnership. As we've heard from Lynn Neagle, what works in one community doesn't work in another. So we do need to engage widely. And I think, as Suzanne also said in the panel discussion, it's critically important that we need to be representative of the communities we want to reach. So hearing those voices and having that engagement is key. So what we plan to do is engage organisations, communities and individuals in relation to mental health stigma and discrimination, to identify and develop interventions and activity to support attitude and behaviour change within diverse communities. And we'll do this via the facilitation of 2 hubs with the objective of, well, there's a number of objectives. One of them is to kind of coalesce the collective force of a myriad of grassroots organisations. We need to build and we need to support the building of capacity within community-based organisations in anti-stigma and sharing best practice from our perspective as Time to Change expertise, but actually sharing and building that capacity with Black, Asian and minority ethnic community organisations. In doing so, we want to recruit, train and support champions from these communities to deliver activities within these communities. So again, going back to that message that we need to be representative of the communities that we serve, and one size doesn't fit all. And part of this as well is also about creating a grant fund for champions and for smaller grassroots organisations to access funding to support in those ambitions. The third bullet point talks about another part of our ambition, which is how we want to work with pledged organisations or employers to reduce stigma, to focus on the areas where there's highest instance of poverty and deprivation in Wales. So specifically in relation to this, what we would hope to do is to scale up our offer to target industries that employ people in those lower socioeconomic areas, which include manufacturing, retail, hospitality, social care, all of those employers, and working with them to develop new employer materials, which we'll co-produce. We would also want to build and evolve the employer pledge to work with employee champions from diverse backgrounds within those employment industries, and again, the reason for that is so that employers in Wales are better equipped to understand and support their workforce, to engage in anti-stigma activity, and to support the well-being needs of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities who are within their workforce, but equally people who are working in lower paid employment. And finally, another element of the campaign is to roll out stigma training across the 7 health boards in Wales. So this year we've been developing a training module within health and social care with a number of health boards. And with continued funding, what we would like to do over the coming 3 years is to roll this out across each of the health board areas, and looking to also adapt some of our materials for an additional audience. So we will work with health boards, and we're looking potentially at working with the benefit system in addition, but we'll obviously be led by the evidence to confirm, where that best area of focus is in terms of the second audience. And what we would hope to achieve through this is stronger, more sustainable strategic partnerships with services across the NHS, health boards and Department of Work and Pensions to develop this work further. And just final point for me is that our vision is for a more inclusive Wales, free of mental health stigma and discrimination, to improve people's lives for the future. So just finally, thank you so much to everybody for attending today. It's been an absolute privilege to to share this online platform with colleagues and with partners from across Wales. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. And I'd like to thank all our speakers today for their contributions to what I hope you'll all agree has been a thought-provoking and very educational event. I just realised, listening to Sue's presentation, I hadn't explained that Havel is now part of Adferiad Recovery, and we're delighted to continue our long-standing partnership with Mind Cymru on Time to Change Wales. So hope the two names haven't caused any confusion there. A big thank you to Stephen, who's our behind-the-scenes techie, and the Time to Change Wales team who've made today happen. Our speakers today have really reminded us that mental health stigma, and in particular Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, and as Suzanne identified, much wider communities, issues get compounded, and within those communities, stigma is both damaging in the way it impacts on the individual and their families, but also in how it prevents them from accessing services. Legislation that reflects our diversity, appropriate policies and practices, and a representative workforce are essential. Education, cultural understanding, and finding the best way to engage with people who've experienced such obstacles to services is key for those of us who provide services and for all of the citizens of Wales to ensure that we're a fair, compassionate and inclusive society. We really appreciate Lynn, the Deputy Minister, taking the time to join us here today, and her commitment to this subject is clear. We are, as Sue noted, in discussions with officials, and will soon submit a bid to the Welsh Government, which will hopefully lead us to ongoing work and further work, particularly in this area. I hope you've all enjoyed the day. Hwyl fawr, take care, and stay safe. Thank you.